Hello and welcome back to the channel um, where we're exploring the Gospel of Matthew. Uh, but today we're just going to talk about the Bible from which we are reading, and we're going to read an introduction to the Word on Fire Bible, which Bishop Barron refers to as the Bible for Restless Hearts. And then the second part will be a little bit of an introduction to the Gospel of Matthew provided by Brandon Vogt. So let's get into it. When I was a child of 11 or 12, this is from Bishop Robert Barron, my parents gave me a Bible as a Christmas present. Like many others before and since, I eagerly set out with the intention of reading my new treasure from cover to cover. I think I got through the 10th chapter of Genesis before giving up. Prompted by a suggestion of my father, I recommenced this time with the New Testament. And somewhere in the first third of the Gospel of Matthew, I ran out of steam. Now, I realise I was only a young man at the time, but the fact remains the Bible is a hard book. To say to someone, just start reading it, is about as helpful as recommending to a novice who has never encountered a word of Shakespeare, just pick up a collection of the Bard's plays and enjoy. The church has realised from the beginning that we need assistance if we are to read the scriptures with profit. We require precisely the interpretive lens provided by the great scholars, saints, mystics, popes, and prophets who have gone before us, those who have, in the course of time, been recognised as masters of the sacred writings. This realisation informs the innumerable study Bibles that have emerged in recent years. But this I mean additions to the scriptures that include, alongside the biblical texts themselves, commentaries, explanations, and prompts for further exploration. The Word on Fire Bible is in this genre, but it has several distinctive features that make it particularly relevant to our time. First, it's specially geared towards those who, for a variety of reasons, are not affiliated with the Christian faith, or indeed with any organised religion. In the course of the last 40 years or so, there has been a massive increase, at least in the Western countries, in the number of those who claim no religious identity. In the United States, this percentage of the unaffiliated has risen from 5% in the early 1970s to 26% in 2019. And if we focus on millennials, the figure rises to fully 40%. The Word on Fire Bible is designed to appeal to non-believers, searchers, and those with far more questions about religion than answers. Secondly, and relatedly, its commentaries hone in on two simple but fundamental questions. Who is God and who is Jesus Christ? We understand that the religiously unaffiliated are unlikely to be interested in intra-ecclesial squabbles or the minutiae of theology. They want to get to the heart of the matter. And so this Bible sheds particular light on the peculiar, puzzling, unnerving, and endlessly fascinating figure that stands at the very heart of the biblical story, namely the God of Israel, and on the one whom St. Paul characterized as the image of the invisible God. The first century Jewish teacher and miracle worker who spoke and acted in the very person of God and who now Christians claim reigns as risen Lord of all creation. Thirdly, the Word on Fire Bible brings in a chorus of voices from the great theological and spiritual tradition in order to sing the meaning of the Scriptures. The reader will hear from Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, John Henry Newman, Teresa of Lisieux, John Paul II, and many, many other teachers in the way of the Spirit. And since it's a Word on Fire Bible, it also includes my own voice as well. For over 30 years, I have been preaching from the Bible as part of my ordinary work as a priest. And since about 2000, I have been sharing homilies on radio and podcasts in connection with my evangelical work. Excerpts from a wide variety of these sermons and other commentaries are featured in this text. Once again, a majority of these elaborations center on the sorts of questions that religious outsiders and spiritual inquirers are likely to ask. A fourth and final distinctive element in the Bible is the focus on what Pope Francis calls the pulchritudinitis, the way of beauty. Catholicism is a very beautiful religion. That beauty has the power to claim us. The beautiful does not merely entertain, rather, it invades, it chooses, and changes the one to whom it deigns to appear. It opens the mind to a consideration of even higher forms of the beautiful, conducing finally to the transcendent source of beauty itself. So the Word on Fire Bible features many striking works of art, as well as literary explanations of those pieces, all designed to introduce the seeker to Christ through the aesthetic splendour that he has inspired. The Bible is indeed the greatest book ever written. It will shape the cultures of the world in countless ways, and it contains the words of everlasting life. But so many today, it's largely opaque, indecipherable, at best a puzzling text from a pre-scientific age. My fondest hope is that this Word on Fire edition of the Sacred Scriptures can bring God's Word to life in a fresh way, especially for those who, whether they fully know it or not, are restlessly seeking the Lord. From Robert Barron. So now we come to the introduction to the Gospel of Matthew by Brandon Vogt. I was once talking with a young man who expressed interest in reading the Bible for the first time, and he asked where to begin. Should he start from Genesis and plough through the whole text, or instead begin with the shortest book, maybe the easiest book? I told him any of those approaches would work, but that I recommended he start with the four Gospels, which recount the life and teachings of Jesus. I explained that Jesus of Nazareth, this strange, beguiling Jewish carpenter who claimed to be the Son of God, performed miracles and then rose from the dead, stands at the center of the Bible's entire story. Everything before the Gospels points to Jesus. Everything after reflects on him. So there's no better place to start in the Bible than the Gospels. But which of the four Gospels? Many people recommend commencing with the Gospel of Mark because it's the shortest and liveliest. However, I prefer Matthew's Gospel. The first Christians favoured it too, giving it a primacy of honour. For various reasons, it was the most widely shared Gospel in the early church. It's the first Gospel by one of Jesus' 12 apostles. It contains a nice mix of Jesus' teachings, actions, and miracles, and it beautifully ties together the Old and New Covenants, which is to say, God's plan for Israel before Jesus and God's plan for the world after him. This is why when the early church wanted to reflect on Jesus' life and hear his voice, it usually turned first to the Gospel of Matthew. So that's what I recommended to the young man. A while later, I followed up to ask how his reading was going. He hesitated and then admitted, well, to be honest, it didn't really go anywhere. I opened up Matthew as you suggested, but I barely made it past the first page. It started with this long list of boring ancient names that I couldn't even pronounce, and I just got stuck. I commiserated. I remembered having the same experience when reading Matthew for the first time. While other biblical books get right into the action, the Gospel of Matthew confusingly begins with a long genealogy, listing dozens of Jesus' relatives all the way back to Abraham, who lived about 2,000 years before Jesus. In addition, the rest of the Gospel is saturated with allusions to Jewish culture and religion, and nearly 100 quotes from the Old Testament. It's easy to get bogged down in all of these ancient accoutrements and wonder why any of it matters to a 21st century reader. Yet, after having read Matthew's Gospel several times since then, I'm convinced that the way the Gospel is structured with its strong Jewish flavour and its opening lineage is not only important, but is the main interpretive key to the whole Gospel. For the major thrust of Matthew's Gospel is this: to fully understand Jesus, you have to understand Israel. Suppose a friend of yours wanted to read The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's unlikely you would tell him, just read the climactic chapter about Frodo scaling Mount Doom to destroy the ring. Questions would immediately ensue. Who is Frodo? What is Mount Doom? What is the ring? Why does it need to be destroyed? Of course, you might grasp some of the story by reading this one main chapter in isolation, but to fully understand its meaning and gravity, you must read it in light of its long backstory. For the many battles, factions, and adventures, the forging of the One Ring, the evil Sauron's machinations and desire for power, the allure of the ring, its history, and why the quest to destroy it is so difficult and necessary. In other words, you must read Frodo in light of the whole background of Middle-earth. The same way we must understand Jesus against the whole background of Israel. This is where Matthew's Gospel shines. The author tells the story of Jesus, a first century wandering preacher, but he constantly paints around the edges, filling in the narrative with the necessary Jewish milieu. The author is insistent, starting with the first words on the first page, that we understand Jesus as the climax to this long, sweeping narrative about Israel that has stretched across thousands of years and all the books of the Old Testament. We can almost hear him saying that the Old Testament is a story of people drawn to God and drifting away, a tale of great heroes and disappointing failures, both of which are represented in Jesus' genealogy, an account of prophecies uttered and unfulfilled, until finally we see the arrival of Jesus, who, according to Matthew, brings the whole story to its fruition. Now, it's true that this volume of the Word on Fire Bible doesn't include the Old Testament. So from this volume alone, you won't get the full backstory. However, the author of Matthew's Gospel does much of the work for you. He positions Jesus in his ancient Jewish context, so he's less of an abstraction and more of the concrete pinnacle of Israel's story. Also, you'll find commentary and insights throughout this book to fill in the background, helping you to understand why this action or that statement from Jesus is so significant, and how first century Israelites would have received it. Much of what Jesus says and does throughout the Gospel of Matthew is coded. For example, he never comes out and explicitly says, "I am God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. Come worship me." Instead, he reveals his divine identity slowly and mysteriously, using veiled allusions that first century Jews would have understood, but Roman enemies would have overlooked. For example, consider Jesus' repeated references to the kingdom. The word kingdom appears over 50 times in Matthew's Gospel, almost always on the lips of Jesus, making it essential to his preaching. Jesus repeatedly proclaims the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. Now, to some listeners who are oblivious to the great story of Israel, or who read this merely in political terms, it seems Jesus is announcing plans to inaugurate a new first century monarchy. He's deeming himself king, a divinely appointed political ruler like Caesar Augustus, one who is perhaps planning to raise an army to help his fellow Jews escape the oppressive boot of Roman rule. But as you'll notice throughout Matthew's Gospel, this isn't the type of kingdom Jesus has in mind. Reading his kingdom in light of the great story of Israel, you discover this kingdom is the one whispered about through Israel's history, one that has been glimpsed at different periods but never fully realized. From the kingdom Adam was supposed to grow and protect in Eden to the kingdom of David at its spiritual peak. In light of this great story, Jesus is less like Caesar and more like King David. Jesus, the King, is meant above all to guide his people toward right praise and worship of God. However, Matthew gives us an added twist. Jesus' new kingdom is not limited to the Jews like David's kingdom. It also stretches far beyond the petty categories of politics and temporal power. It's a kingdom not just for Israelites, but one extending across all creation, from earth to heaven, and even across time. In this new kingdom, humility, sacrifice, love, worship, and enemy forgiveness are the defining features, not power, dominance, selfishness, fear, and vengeance. This is the great proclamation and invitation of Matthew's Gospel. A new kingdom has arrived, led by Jesus Christ, a new and definitive King. And whenever you live on earth, and whatever your background, you're invited to be a part of it, to come under his glorious reign. David's kingdom was for the Jews. Jesus' kingdom is for the world. But how do we enter this kingdom? Jesus tells us throughout Matthew's Gospel, turn away from sinful behavior and align your will to God's, so that you want what he wants. Pick up your cross, your unique difficulties and struggles, and carry it alongside Christ. Ask for the kingdom and seek it with vigor. Shed your ego and become childlike with humility. Become baptized and join the church that Jesus established. There's much more to reflect on in this magnificent book, but as with all great books, the best way to understand it is simply to read it yourself. Whether you're new to the Bible or have read it numerous times, brace yourself to meet the captivating figure of Jesus, who is unlike any character of history. This gospel displays him with particular malevolence. Jesus paradoxically appears harsh yet merciful, authoritative yet humble, mercurial yet balanced and trusted. It's not that Jesus is self-contradictory, it's that he's beyond our normal human categories. There is an untamed electricity that courses through the wire of Jesus' life as it unfolds through Matthew's Gospel. It will shock and surprise you, perhaps even attract you. In any case, encountering it will never leave you the same. Next episode, we'll tackle chapter 1. Thanks for listening.